Is boxing on life support, or is it going to make a comeback? Last year, Francis Ngannou shocked the world by announcing he had signed with the PFL and would be competing in an MMA super fight against Bellator heavyweight champion Ryan Bader. The pay was better, but there were other perks to the deal that made the switch irresistible. Ngannou was granted more creative control over his fights. He could also work with other companies outside of the UFC like Onyx, and was even given an equity stake in the PFL. The biggest draw from the PFL's part, however, was that they promised to push for a super fight between Ngannou and Bader in their upcoming season. And what a super fight it will be. It will likely go down as one of the biggest events of 2023. With all things considered, do you think that this will be the last time we see Ngannou compete inside the octagon? If you asked this question a few years ago, the answer would have been no. But MMA's popularity has exploded in recent years. One organization in particular has been leading the charge, the UFC in fact. They saw record-breaking numbers at their most recent event, UFC 284. But is it all just a flash in the pan? Or is MMA really leaving boxing behind? Let's take a look at the future of boxing. Firstly, let's talk about the most popular combat sport in the world. It's not difficult to guess which one it is. With over 2 billion fans worldwide, the most popular combat sport is none other than boxing. You may be thinking, wait a second, is that including MMA? No, these are two separate categories. That's right. MMA is also very popular with over 600 million fans worldwide, but when compared to boxing, it pales in comparison. Now don't get me wrong, 600 million fans is a lot of people. There's just something special about boxing that draws in such huge crowds. The first Olympic boxing competition dates back to 668 BC. It was during the ancient Olympics held in Greece. However, the modern version of boxing emerged in the 18th century in England. From here, it spread around the globe and eventually became the sport that we know and love today. Over the years, some of the greatest boxers ever to step foot in the ring include Muhammad Ali, Joe Louis, Mike Tyson, and Floyd Mayweather. These men drew in crowds unlike anything we had ever seen before. Television broadcasts of their fights were must-watch events. People would tune in from around the world to see what would happen next. At the time, MMA wasn't even around. So these boxers were truly the kings of the combat sport world. But times have changed. Since the turn of the millennium, MMA has grown exponentially in popularity. This is mainly thanks to one man, Dana White. When he took over the UFC in 2001, it was a dying sport. But his leadership and vision turned the company around, and now it dominates the combat sports industry. According to Forbes, the UFC is worth over $12 billion. Don't think for a second that this isn't a big deal. Here's how much the other major sports leagues are worth. NBA, $10 billion. NFL, $96 billion. MLB, $70 billion. And finally, the NHL, $85 billion. Yes, the UFC isn't worth as much as the other major sports leagues, but it's growing faster than any of them. There's just one problem. For boxing to regain its popularity, it needs to adapt to the changing times. And that starts with embracing new technology. We all know that boxing has a rich history. Part of this is due to its traditional nature. For example, the rules haven't changed much since the sport's early days. This helps to preserve the integrity of the sport, but it doesn't exactly make it more exciting to watch. In fact, many people find boxing to be rather slow-paced. Take a look at this fight between Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor. It's one of the most anticipated fights of recent times. Yet the majority of people who watched it felt disappointed because there wasn't enough action. To be fair, it was still a great fight. Mayweather won by TKO in the 10th round, but if we're being honest, most people were hoping for a knockout. Fortunately, this is where boxing falls short. There's just not as much action as in other combat sports, and this is reflected in the low viewership numbers. And don't get me wrong, boxing still does well, but compared to its glory days, it's not the same. So how can boxing regain its popularity? Well, one way is to embrace new technology. This includes things like virtual reality, which allows fans to experience fights in a more immersive way. Another option is to stream fights online, which makes them more accessible to a global audience. Finally, boxing needs to continue to innovate and evolve. This means coming up with new and exciting ways to promote fights, as well as finding fresh talent to keep the sport interesting. In terms of fresh talent, there's one name that keeps popping up, Jake Paul. Now, I'm sure you've heard of him, even if you don't follow boxing closely. A popular YouTube sensation, Paul has decided to follow in the footsteps of his brother Logan and pursue a career in professional wrestling. His first fight was against fellow YouTuber Deji Olatunji. Paul won the fight by TKO in the 5th round. Since then, he's gone on to face several other professional fighters. Now, speaking of fighting YouTubers, there's one man who seems to have a personal vendetta against them, and that's none other than Hasim Rahman. He's taken it upon himself to single-handedly wipe out the fighting YouTubers. So far, he's faced off against 2 popular YouTubers and defeated both of them by KO. Rahman's next opponent is another popular YouTuber, Austin McBroom. The fight is set to take place on June, and don't think for a second that this won't be a good fight. McBroom is no slouch. He's a former basketball player who turned YouTuber. He's 5 feet 11 inches and 210 pounds. He's got a reach of 80 inches and a knockout percentage of 50. So he's definitely someone to be reckoned with. If Rahman manages to defeat McBroom, it'll send a clear message to other YouTubers looking to make a name for themselves in boxing. In other words, don't expect any easy fights. While MMA is growing in popularity, it's important to remember that it's not without its problems. Take the recent debacle with the UFC and its parent company, the Endeavor Group Holdings. Basically, the UFC was trying to sell shares in a public offering, but interest was so low that they had to pull the plug at the last minute. This was a huge blow to the UFC, but it also sent shockwaves throughout the MMA community. Many people are now calling for more transparency from the UFC and its parent company. They want to know how the UFC plans to grow in popularity, if it remains shrouded in secrecy. Others believe that the UFC should be broken up and sold to smaller companies. This would allow for more competition in the MMA space and hopefully lead to more exciting fights. Whatever happens, it's clear that the UFC is at a crossroads. The recent IPO flop has put the spotlight on the company, and it'll all be interesting to see how they respond. So is boxing dead? The answer is no. It's just evolving and changing with the times. While it may never regain its former glory, boxing still has a bright future ahead of it. Thanks for watching.